What's up everybody, this is Ambro with AMBG, and today we are talking about the PS5 exclusive Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. This game is out now for $70 US at the time of writing. There is a lot of hype and hubbub about this game. This is also my first review. I appreciate anyone who has checked into this review, considering that there are much larger reviewers with a proven track record that you could be watching, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Anyway, just as a disclaimer, I'm a huge fan of the YouTube game reviewer by the name of ACG, or Angry Centaur Gaming. He is by far my personal, most trusted favorite reviewer, and honestly, you should be checking out his channel. But the reason I bring it up is because I want to do the format of my reviews similar to his. I like the way he breaks down his categories, so we're gonna follow that. At the end of the review, I'll give you some reasons to buy the game and some reasons not to buy the game, and then you can decide for yourself if it's worth your hard-earned cash. Sound good? Let's get started. So graphics and presentation are up first. I think the drive to achieve Pixar DreamWorks levels of real-time rendering in video games has hit its apex point here. Honestly, top to bottom, this game is visually astonishing. The insanely high-resolution textures that hold up to close inspection, the insanely well-done lighting and PBR materials with how light plays off of them, and the strand system that Insomniac developed for Spider-Man Miles Morales has made a return here, and you can literally count individual strands on close-ups of our furry heroes Ratchet and Rivet. It's astonishing the level of detail on display, of which can be inspected on a zoom-in via the photo mode. There are 3 graphics modes available to the player: a 4K 30 FPS fidelity mode with all the effects cranked to 11, a performance mode without ray tracing running at a sub 4K 60 FPS, and a performance ray tracing mode that has ray tracing turned on and targets 60 FPS. All modes use a dynamic resolution scaling, but honestly, with Insomniac's insane temporal upscaling technology, sitting at a normal distance from a 4K screen, you'd be hard-pressed to really care about the slight difference in image quality. Performance RT mode is absolutely the way to go here, and everything that you're going to be seeing in this video was captured with that mode turned on. We'll go a bit more into it in just a little bit, but I found no issues with this mode whatsoever. I flipped between all 3 of the modes just to see, and I always came back to the Performance RT mode. Speaking of which, let's talk about the incredibly well done implementation of the ray traced reflections. Now, ray tracing was criticized in the past for being nothing more than a gimmick, but in this game, I really do feel that it adds depth to the scenes in the world that you just can't get with screen space techniques. It absolutely adds substance to the vibes and the aura of exploring this vast galaxy. The game's art actually looks like it was designed around ray tracing. When you turn it off in the one and only mode that actually has it turned off, it looks a lot more like the 2016 entry, which isn't bad, but with it turned on, it just looks leaps and bounds better than that. In some scenes more than others, sure, but any scene involving Clank, the difference is night and day. It's not even that all the scenes look dramatically different, which some do, but now it's just that the visuals look right. Like, your brain can always interpret games without ray tracing and be like, okay, it's believable. But now your brain doesn't have to do the work anymore. Now it's just there already. Your eyes just soak it in and your brain goes, wow, yeah, that looks right. It's not extrapolating imaginary images that aren't there, it's just a part of the experience. Volumetric effects and God rays in all of the right places give the environments so much depth. The amount of particle effects that go on the screen without causing any drop to performance really shows off the power inside the now current generation consoles. Honestly, it gets to the point later on in the game where you can hardly see anything going on because there are so many particle effects popping on the screen, but it's all done so gracefully and with proper visual cues, along with the incredible animation work that is present throughout the entirety of the game. It's as if the developers hid the grunts from Halo 3 with the birthday skull turned on all around the map, and they're just exploding at all times. It's honestly insane. I think one of my bigger complaints with the PS4 Ratchet and Clank game was that not only did some of the characters not hold up on close inspection, but the animation in that game seemed stilted in some instances. They were very robotic and very gamey. You can tell that there was no motion capture. I felt absolutely none of that here. The animation in this work is very well done. It's not Naughty Dog and The Last of Us levels of realism because, well, this isn't based in realism. Everything done here is suitably cartoony and fits the setting. The way enemies shake when being electrocuted, the way Ratchet stretches as he jumps. In cutscenes, all of the main characters' faces cringe and wince with believable expressions even on their non-human faces. That lends itself a sense of relatability that you expect from a narrative-driven experience. To top off the world-class rendering and great animation work on display here, the presentation from the cinematic cutscenes to gameplay are seamless. Remember in the recent God of War game or a Jedi Fallen Order where you had to squeeze through these tight spots in the world? That was actually masking game loading. Asset streaming on last generation consoles had to be worked around the hardware available, and while it was done well, it still felt gamey. There is none of that here. This game really flexes the hardware muscles of the PS5 and that SSD. There are moments where you jump planets, and the game does this Star Wars-esque wipe across the screen. It's basically a short cutscene to show the transition between planets. But when you land and Ratchet or Rivet jumps out of the ship, there is no fade to black. There's no loading. You just move them. You just move your joystick and move the character, and then the camera pulls into where it's supposed to be. And it's honestly jaw-dropping. The first time it happened, I caught myself sitting there for 10 seconds or so, waiting for that very video gamey transition to the proper perspective. But it never came. And it's more shocking when the vistas in this game can be very large and wide, in fact, much larger than any Ratchet and Clank game before it. Insomniac has always done a good job at making environments feel larger than they are, but in this game they definitely explored larger, more open-world environments. Think something along the lines of Metro Exodus's pseudo-open world and less Assassin's Creed Odyssey. You won't be crossing oceans or anything like that, but it does take time to cross some of the maps, but we'll get more into that on the gameplay section of the review. Lastly, just to touch on the cutscenes, they are expertly done here. Seriously, we are leaping closer to Pixar levels of work here. I was so excited to see the next cutscene and just sit back and marvel at the quality of the spectacle. Well-timed camera cuts, the graphical sheen, and the timing and delivery of the big moments. Also, the UI and menu system is really well done. It's really slick. There's really nothing else to say here. The screen is never too crowded, while also giving all the information to the player that it needs. It's all modern and suitably space adventure-y, and I love it. Overall, absolutely top-notch graphics and presentation. What's crazy is that Insomniac said that this is just the tip of the iceberg for what's possible on the PS5. This is just the beginning, and I can't wait to see what comes next. Now we get on to sound, music, and voice.
To Club Nefarious, and you will find him.
Club Nefarious, got it. Oh, and nice work, Secret Agent Zircon. Handle this, Phantom. You just get to safety.
Another ridiculous. Please refrain from using
Testing playing the game both out of a TV speaker and a good set of headphones, the game has a fantastic balance of audio. There was never a sound that overpowered others. I would say that the game is a bit heavy on the sounds in the mid-range for the effects for the insane amount of weapons that you have, and on occasion they can get drowned out by all of the other weapons that you may still have active on the battlefield. That being said, sound is done incredibly well here, and this is certainly a game that flexes the 3D audio that the PS5 is capable of. Every shot of a weapon, every screech of an enemy reverberates through the given environment, and you can hear the difference when you're in a cave versus when you're in an open field. All the sounds have the right amount of punch and bass to let you know what's about to hit you in the side of the face. The game has very good directional sound. Is it Logan Paul winding up to hit you, or is it King Kong? Things like the basic blaster pistol that you use simply sound less impactful than some of the heavy-hitting weapons that you get later on, and that's how it should be. The sounds of the riffs will send chills down your spine. The deep bass and the reverb is done so well here, at the first time you hear it, it feels as impactful as it should be. It sounds and feels like you are ripping open a hole in time and space. Something of that magnitude should have a sound that fits that. The ambient sounds of the game are also incredibly well done. It's no secret by now that there are segments of the game where you flip between alternate dimensions, and in these moments, you may be going from a highly populated area with lots of bustling life and NPCs to a completely dead area. and after the impact of the dimension jumping ends, you're left with either one of those two things, and the sound adjustment in your own brain is stark. Your brain has this, like, 2-second readjustment period, like, oh, okay, I'm back here now. What was my objective again? It's just so cool how well it's done, both visually and on an audio level. Voice acting is also top-notch here. Insomniac has always knocked this out of the park. The delivery of the lines are believable, and are at the right emotional level given the context. I feel that the voice actress for Rivet, in particular, did an exceptional job. It's always a lot of pressure on game developers to add in a new character like Rivet, but honestly, what else would you expect from Jennifer Hale? Rivet carries some really emotional lines in the game, and the actress delivered them extremely well. This also goes for a lot of the side characters. Now, not all of them are going to stand out to you, but everything is at least following the vibe of that cartoony, family-friendly Pixar level of entertainment and presentation. Everything from the robot pirate Pierre to Mrs. Zircon are all distinct from one another. You'll come to love their quirks and their delivery, and their personality really bleeds through their voice lines. Even without exaggerated animations, if you just closed your eyes and listened to the voice lines, you can almost still see it being played out in front of you. Lastly, I'll make a quick point on the music. I feel this is also done very well. It has a really great mix of synth, eerie, space mystery to it, and combined with a Marvel-esque hero type of vibe to really set the tone. This is, at heart, a story told about our heroes stopping a villain on a galactic universal scale, and the score needs to match the magnitude of that situation, which you'll come to learn if you play the game. It's a dire situation for our heroes, both metallic and furry alike. It swells at the big moments, and in the quieter moments when running around the maps, it still gives off the vibes that this is a feel-good adventure for the family, and that's where it really succeeds. Great music. I'm not going to spend too much more time here. Let's get on to a bit about the story as well as the gameplay. In Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, our heroes start out being celebrated for their heroics when suddenly one of their nemesis, Dr. Nefarious, crashes the party to steal what was supposed to be a gift for Ratchet in the Dimensionator, a device capable of opening up rifts to alternate dimensions. Conflict ensues, and in that conflict, the Dimensionator is damaged, which causes this huge explosion that sends out a ripple into the universe, and our heroes actually get separated and thrown into an alternate dimension where Dr. Nefarious always wins. The goal then becomes simple: find Clank and stop Dr. Nefarious. Plain and simple. However, this introduces us to our new heroine, Rivet. Rivet is also Lombax from the universe where Ratchet and Clank actually end up after the initial struggle with Dr. Nefarious. She is also a Lombax, like Ratchet, and the last of her kind. She's a freedom fighter whose goal is to mess up the plans of her universe's Nefarious. One thing that you do need to know is that this is a standalone story. You do not need to play any other games in the franchise. Your experience will certainly be boosted if you played the others, but it will not detract from your playthrough. That being said, given Rivet's personality and background, playing as her and seeing her growth is an absolute delight. She is a strong yet vulnerable character who wants good things, but is worried about putting herself out of her comfort zone. In this 10 to 20 hour experience, based on the difficulty, your own skill at the game, and if you're a completionist, you'll split your gameplay between Rivet and Ratchet pretty equally, and they have the exact same attacks and abilities. This is one of the few complaints that I have about the game. They have this super well-acted and realized hero, only to make her feel the same as Ratchet in every single way. Upgrades even carry over no matter which character you're currently controlling at the time, which doesn't make any sense. At one point you receive an item from an NPC as Ratchet. Then the next part of the story comes up, and Rivet inexplicably has the item with no explanation. It's just a bit out of place and took me out of the experience. It's not game-breaking by any means, but I did notice it. I would have liked to see at least one or two differences between the characters, just enough to make them feel distinct. Speaking of the gameplay, this game is an over-the-shoulder platformer shooter. You have a basic melee attack, we've talked about the guns, you have a jump, a double jump, a dash. You do have some basic platforming with the jumping and the dashing, nothing too complicated. While a lot of the marketing material does show this game as an on-rails experience, fear not. Most of the game will have you running around its beautifully crafted worlds. That being said, these on-rail segments are meant to enhance the experience and provide this big, over-the-top set pieces that help set the tone of the story being told. They are fun, and a few of them are really clever. and best of all, there's not too many of them. However, it's not the platforming or shooting that really make the combat such a joy. It's the completely absurd, over-the-top weapons that have always been a staple to the franchise. I'm not going to reveal all of them, but there are some absolutely zany weapons. Each weapon feels very unique and like they're catered for specific situations. You have explosives and area of effect weapons designed for crowd control, and then you have your super hard-hitting, slower reload weapons meant to inflict as much damage as possible in a single hit. You also get weapons that bring out timed helpers that will help fight alongside you for a set period of time or a certain amount of attacks. You by no means have to use these weapons, but on the harder difficulties, it's basically required that you will get mauled by the volume of enemies that you fight in certain situations. That being said, you always feel equipped to fight the mobs of enemies that you face. There isn't a huge amount of enemy variety. You have standard goons who just run at you with no rhyme or reason. You have those little annoying bastards that'll come up and bite your leg, and as the game goes on, you'll get introduced to sniper rifle enemies, enemies that use guns, shields, swords, and so on. You do get these mini-bosses on occasion, but the variety in that department is severely lacking, so once you've fought one of them, you've fought them all. Like I said, you still always do feel equipped to fight the enemies. On the higher difficulties, you will run out of ammo for your guns, and you are forced to use your entire arsenal, which I love this about this game. In most games, you're able to just upgrade and modify one weapon, and it's a one-size-fits-all. That is absolutely not the case here. Sometimes you run out of all of your area of effect weapons and have to dodge and dip around and use your other weapons, or just move in close for the kill with the melee, which is one of your more powerful weapons. Combat overall is super enjoyable. The variety of weapons, the graphical splendor of these weapons absolutely needs to be applauded. There's one weapon that turns your enemy into these like statues of leaves. I know it sounds weird. This weapon freezes your enemies in place while covering them in this leaf texture, and it looks brilliant and almost like you don't want to shoot them. Other weapons like the lightning gun give off a great visual display and animation that the enemy is being electrocuted. There are so many weapons, and I mean so many. Particle effects galore. It's so enjoyable, and lots of people will probably end up using different weapons more so than others, so your mileage may vary. There's a lot of combat in this game, but another thing Rift Apart does so well is breaking up the gameplay and exploration with puzzles and alternate combat scenarios. Let me explain. As part of the story, you'll deal with these anomalies. These are part of the story and the fallout of the Dimensionator breaking. These are puzzle segments where you control Clank, and you have to fix that anomaly successfully, giving these copies of yourself the ability to cross from one side of the dimensional bridge to another by throwing these orbs that have different effects to them. Now, some of these orbs make these copies or possibilities heavy so that they can pass through a fan that's blowing wind, which would otherwise cause them to be blown off the map. Or they make the copies really light and able to jump over obstacles that would otherwise obscure their path. There are not too many of these puzzles. I'd say maybe a dozen of them or so are scattered throughout the entire experience, but they are expertly placed in strategic areas to break up the standard combat scenarios. There is also another small combat scenario that I don't want to spoil, but just know that it's very clever, it doesn't overstay its welcome, and I really enjoyed the personality of these smaller events. That brings us to the exploration, economy, and progression aspect of Ratchet and Clank. Rift Apart has a lot of old school feeling to it, and this is a good thing. There are boxes, barrels, and containers throughout the entirety of the game that are meant to be broken, and in these containers are the game's currency. You will explore every nook and cranny to find these boxes. At times, it almost feels like a Lego game with how much you break these things and the little bolts magnetically fly into Ratchet's body. There are also collectibles that will unlock cosmetic items for Ratchet and Rivet that are hidden in the maps, which are fairly large, and I'll get to that in a second. But as you collect the two main currencies being bolts and raritanium, you'll make your way to Mrs. Zircon, who is the vendor, and she'll let you upgrade your weapons or buy new ones. This game does have sort of a skill tree system to its weapons here, where you buy the upgrades with one of the currencies, and you see those yellow areas. Those are the ones that give your weapons more meaningful upgrades, like giving an explosive a secondary explosion from the shrapnel of the initial explosion, causing way more damage. The darker gray upgrades are small and iterative, but if you unlock all the ones surrounding those gold yellow ones, you'll unlock the real upgrades. you get this currency in spades, so don't feel like you have to hoard this currency by any means. As long as you're exploring the map and looking in corners, up and down, and taking your time, you will find them. Speaking of which, let's talk about the environments and areas of the game. The variety of the biomes is simply stunning. I honestly can't say enough good things about the variety and how every area feels different and has different environmental hazards from one another. They all give off a distinct feeling from one another that is hard to come by in a lot of games. If you've never played the game, you might think looking in from the outside that Ratchet and Clank is a linear, story-based adventure that takes you down these set paths with timed hazards and on-rail segments. What the media doesn't show you are these fairly large pseudo-open-world areas. It is clear that Insomniac flirted with the idea of one giant seamless world because the farther you go in the game, the larger these areas get. You are free to just completely ditch the main objective and either do the very short list of side quests that exist on each planet, or go around and find every collectible and find every one of these rifts that gives you a cosmetic reward. This feels more like Metro Exodus with its design. It's not a complete open world by any means, but it does give the leash some slack and let you explore these beautifully crafted and connected worlds. This is another very small complaint I actually have about the game. These larger open world sections encourage exploration, but there's no incentive other than getting the collectibles to explore these areas. They play absolutely no part in the larger story, they're just there. I know that this is nitpicking because these areas don't detract from the experience, and you're absolutely free to just run through the story. But when the game looks and plays this good, why would you? This is all also done with the rifts themselves. Jumping through the rifts is one of the defining features of Rift Apart, if not the defining feature. And it's been advertised as so. This is a game mechanic that would not work on PlayStation 4 hardware. It's just not possible. I won't try and describe why, just go watch Digital Foundry or something. As both story segments and part of exploration, you will jump through these rifts that will take you to a wildly different location from the one that you're in. There are these smaller rifts that help you jump and reposition yourself on the battlefield, but that's not what I'm talking about here. Parts of the story scenes will have you jumping through consecutive rifts one after the other, and seeing this happen in person is jaw-dropping. Some of these sections are partially on rails, but still, to see it all happen without a loading screen is something you need to see for yourself. It's one thing to see it in a compressed YouTube video, but it's another to see it and feel it in person. 1 second you're in a grassy, swampy area, and the next you're in an arid, desert-like location, with you at no point changing perspective from Ratchet. It's all seamless and incredible. It just feels like witchcraft. How did I get here? Why is there no loading screen? Yes, we've seen the comparisons to Titanfall 2's mission where you're jumping through time, but that was nothing compared to the scale and splendor in which it's done in Rift Apart. Every single time I jumped through a rift, I marveled at it. Knowing where video games started and where we have come, to see this done in real time in a game, it's just amazing. Oh, one last thing before we wrap this up, the DualSense controller. I think it's safe to say that we are beyond it being a gimmick. I've now played several games with the DualSense, and it absolutely adds to the experience. The way the triggers pull back and react to different guns, but also has implications for gameplay. Some of the guns react to being pushed down halfway, and then fully fire when pressed down the whole way. Even if you didn't have the DualSense, the guns all had great feedback to begin with, but the DualSense just takes it to another level. Now let's just get down to our final assessment. Overall, absolutely stellar game, and seems like the culmination of so many lessons learned, and also having the shackles of last generation hardware shed so that the developers over at Insomniac could really spread their wings. The very few and minor negatives I laid out are absolutely not a reason to not buy this game. It is a world-class project through and through. Now let's get down to the final part of the review. I'll give you reasons to buy it and reasons not to buy it. If you are into narrative-driven stories, a fan of the series, and are a fan of shooters, and you don't mind the art style, plain and simple, go get this game. $70 is a big asking price for a relatively short experience. I get that, but this game truly is more than a tech demo for the PS5. It feels next generation, or should I say current generation. Go buy it. Reasons not to buy it. Every gamer does have different preferences. If the cartoony style doesn't do it for you, I can totally get that. if it feels like a quote-unquote kiddie game to you. I can get that too. Ratchet and Clank originally was targeted towards children, and it definitely still is, but that doesn't mean that it can't appeal to an adult audience as well. In fact, the game actually does explore a few adult themes with it, and I think they did it really gracefully. So anyway, that's going to do it for this review. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to check it out. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button. It would really help out the channel, and I would greatly appreciate it. I would love to hear your impressions or thoughts on the game down in the comments. Also, follow me on Twitter so that we can talk about, well, anything gaming related. I'll leave a link to everything down in the description below. This is Amber with AMBG signing off, and I'll catch you guys next time.